not boarding this aircraft, and frankly, you shouldn't even be in this terminal. People like you need to learn there are consequences for fraud.
The words sliced through the humid air of Miami International Airport like a blade, sharp and deliberate. Rebecca Martinez, senior gate agent, with 15 years of what she called experience dealing with difficult passengers, delivered them with the confidence of someone who believed she held all the power. Her badge gleamed under the fluorescent lights of Gate B47, and her perfectly pressed Delta uniform gave her the authority she craved. She stood behind her podium like a fortress, arms crossed, staring down at two young black women in designer athleisure who had dared to approach her first-class priority lane. What Rebecca didn't know was that in exactly 14 minutes, she wouldn't just be denying two passengers boarding. She'd be grounding every Delta flight on the East Coast. She'd become the face of everything wrong with customer service trending on every social platform and unemployed before the sun set on this Friday evening in November. But none of that had happened yet. For now, she was just a gate agent who saw two hoodies and assumed she knew everything about the people wearing them. Before we dive into this story, I want you to do something. Drop your city in the comments if you've ever been profiled at an airport treated differently because of how you looked or dismissed before you even opened your mouth. Hit subscribe if you believe in quiet power over loud revenge. And if you've ever been underestimated because of your age, your clothes, or the color of your skin, this story is for you. Because this isn't just about customer service. This is about what happens when arrogance meets the wrong family. This is about the moment when assumption becomes devastation and when power doesn't need to raise its voice to be heard across an entire industry. The automatic doors of Miami International Airport had opened moments earlier, releasing a wave of air conditioning into the muggy evening heat and admitting the Thompson twins. Amara and Zara moved through the terminal with the synchronized grace that only comes from sharing a womb and 23 years of life together. To the casual observer, they looked like exactly what they were: Gen Z college students heading somewhere expensive for a long weekend. Amara the elder by 6 minutes, and the one with the sharper tongue, wore an Alo yoga set in cream that cost more than most people's monthly car payment. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek ponytail that showed off diamond studs that caught the light with every turn of her head. She moved with the confident stride of someone who had never been told she didn't belong anywhere. Zara, the diplomat of the two, had chosen a matching set in sage green that complemented her gold jewelry and the gentle smile that usually disarmed anyone who might be having a bad day. Where Amara was, fire Zara was warmth. Where Amara confronted Zara, charmed. But make no mistake, they were both their father's daughters, and when pushed, they both knew how to push back. They wheeled matching Hermes travel bags behind them, the kind that don't just cost a fortune, but whisper wealth to anyone who knows what to look for. Their Air Jordan exclusives, limited edition, sold out everywhere, impossible to get unless you knew someone who knew someone, completed the picture of young women who clearly had access to money. Gate B47. Zara said, checking her phone as they navigated through the Friday evening rush. First-class boarding should start in 20 minutes. Dad said the lounge has good Wi-Fi. Amara replied, adjusting her Hermes bag. I need to finish my paper on constitutional law before we land in Paris. They were heading to Paris Fashion Week, a birthday gift from their father that included front-row seats at shows most people only saw on Instagram, a suite at the Four Seasons, and enough spending money to make even trust fund kids jealous. It was supposed to be their reward for another semester of straight A's. Amara at Columbia Law, Zara at Parsons School of Design. It was supposed to be the perfect start to a perfect weekend. Rebecca Martinez was having the opposite of a perfect day. At 42, she'd been passed over for promotion to gate supervisor, for the third time, this time losing out to a younger woman with half her experience and what Rebecca bitterly referred to as the right look for corporate. Her divorce had been finalized 6 months ago, and her ex-husband's child support payments were chronically late, while their 16-year-old son needed increasingly expensive medical treatments for his asthma. To make matters worse, Delta had been cracking down on what they called upgrade fraud, passengers using various schemes to access first-class accommodations they hadn't paid for. Rebecca had received 3 memos in the past month emphasizing the importance of scrutinizing anyone who looked inconsistent with their booking class. The language was careful corporate and completely open to interpretation. Rebecca had her own interpretation, and when she saw Amara and Zara Thompson approaching the first-class priority lane, every bias she'd carefully hidden behind professional courtesy for 15 years suddenly had a target. She saw the hoodies first. Despite costing more than her monthly salary, Rebecca saw casual wear and filed it under inappropriate for first class. She saw their ages and thought probably using Daddy's credit card. She saw their laughter, their easy confidence, their comfort in their own skin, and her internal alarm system, finely tuned by years of looking for reasons to say no, went to DEFCON 1. "Excuse me," Rebecca called out, her voice cutting through the ambient terminal noise. She didn't look up from her computer screen, a power move she'd perfected over the years. "The economy boarding line is at gate B52 around the corner by the restrooms. This is priority access only." Amara stopped walking. She adjusted her grip on her passport and boarding pass, feeling the familiar flutter in her stomach that came whenever she encountered what she'd learned to recognize as a situation. She'd been dealing with situations since she was old enough to notice that she was often the only black person in rooms full of white people who seemed surprised to see her there. "We know," Amara said evenly. "We're flying first class." Rebecca finally looked up. Her eyes were sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses that made her look like a librarian from a movie about strict librarians. She looked the twins up and down in a way that felt like an examination lingering on their expensive luggage, with the kind of scrutiny that made it clear she was calculating worth versus appearance. "First class," she repeated, letting the words hang in the air like a question mark. "Let me see your boarding passes." Zara stepped forward with the smile that had gotten her out of parking tickets and late assignment penalties since high school. "Here you go. We checked in online, but the app said we needed document verification at the gate." Rebecca snatched the phones from their hands with more force than necessary. She didn't scan the boarding passes immediately. Instead, she stared at the screens, then at the twins, then back at the screens, her expression cycling through confusion, suspicion, and something that looked distinctly like disbelief. "Thompson," she muttered, reading their names. "Amara and Zara. Thompson. Is there a problem?" Amara asked, her voice tightening just enough to signal that her patience was finite. She sensed the shift in the air, the change in energy that every person of color learns to recognize. It's the moment before a bureaucratic hurdle appears out of thin air, the pause before someone in uniform decides that your paperwork isn't quite right, your reservation somehow can't be found, or your presence needs additional verification. "These boarding passes," Rebecca said, her voice rising just enough to attract attention from the businessmen in expensive suits standing behind them in line, "are marked as executive companion status. That's a classification reserved for board members and senior corporate affiliates." "Correct?" Amara said. Rebecca let out a short, dry laugh that held no humor whatsoever. "Right. And I suppose you're both Fortune 500 executives." The sarcasm dripped from every word, and several passengers in line craned their necks to see what was happening. This was exactly what Rebecca wanted, an audience for what she was certain would be the exposure of another upgrade scam. "Look, girls," Rebecca continued, her voice now loud enough to ensure everyone could hear her. "I don't know whose corporate miles you managed to steal or what kind of scheme you're running with these boarding passes, but I'm not in the mood to deal with fraud today." "Fraud?" Zara's smile disappeared entirely. "Our father booked these flights. I don't care if your father is Jay-Z," Rebecca interrupted, slamming their phones down on the high counter with enough force to make other passengers flinch. We've been warned about fraudulent bookings coming from compromised corporate accounts. You're holding up the line for legitimate passengers." The word legitimate hung in the air like a slap. Amara felt her jaw tighten, felt the familiar fire that her father had taught her to bank to control to use as fuel rather than let it consume her. She planted her feet, squared her shoulders, and looked Rebecca Martinez directly in the eye. "We're not moving anywhere," Amara said, her voice dropping to the register that made her constitutional law professors pay attention. "Scan our boarding passes. If they're fraudulent, call security. But you're not going to dismiss us because you don't think we look like we belong in first class." Rebecca's face flushed a splotchy red that climbed from her collar to her hairline. She stood up from her chair, using her height to loom over the podium, trying to use physical presence to intimidate two women who had never been intimidated by anyone except their father when they'd forgotten to call home. "I am the senior gate agent for this terminal," Rebecca declared, her voice now carrying clearly across the gate area, "and I have the discretion to deny boarding to any passenger exhibiting aggressive or suspicious behavior. And right now your tone is extremely aggressive." It was the classic setup, the trap that had been set for countless passengers before them. Accuse them of fraud, and when they protest their innocence, ban them for having an attitude. Rebecca Martinez had perfected this particular dance over 15 years of gate agent power trips, but she had never tried it on the daughters of Marcus Thompson. Marcus Thompson didn't look like a billionaire. At 48, he preferred khakis to suits, drove a Ford pickup truck instead of a Tesla, and could often be found at construction sites wearing steel-toed boots and a hard hat, personally inspecting fuel storage tanks and reviewing safety protocols. He was the kind of wealthy that didn't need to display itself, the kind of power that whispered instead of shouted. But make no mistake, Marcus Thompson was one of the most influential men in American aviation, even if most people had never heard his name. Thompson Aviation Services wasn't a household name because it didn't need to be. If you flew out of the East Coast, there was a 60% chance your plane was burning fuel that Marcus Thompson's company had refined, transported, and delivered. If your luggage arrived on time, it probably moved through facilities maintained by Thompson's subsidiaries. If your flight took off on schedule, it was likely because Thompson Aviation Services had ensured that every piece of ground equipment was functioning perfectly. Marcus was the infrastructure. He was the ghost in the machine that made modern air travel possible. He supplied fuel to Delta American United and JetBlue. He maintained ground equipment at 37 major airports. His company's tentacles reached into every aspect of aviation operations. Invisible, but absolutely essential. He had started with nothing. The son of a mechanic from Detroit who had worked his way through community college, gotten an associate degree in aviation maintenance, and bought his first fuel truck with a loan that required his mother to put up her house as collateral. That was 26 years ago. Today, Thompson Aviation Services employed 12,000 people and generated $4 billion in annual revenue. Marcus had built his empire on three principles: excellence, reliability, and respect. Excellence in service delivery. His fuel was always the purest, his maintenance always the most thorough, his staff always the most professional. Reliability in partnerships. When Marcus Thompson signed a contract, it was honored to the letter on time, every time. And respect for his employees, his partners, and his customers. But the principle he held most sacred was respect. Marcus Thompson had grown up being told he wasn't smart enough, wasn't good enough, wasn't the right fit for opportunities that seemed to flow easily to others. He had built his company with the determination that no one who worked with him would ever experience that kind of dismissal, which made what was happening to his daughters at Gate B47 not just personally offensive, but a violation of everything he had spent his adult life fighting against. Rebecca Martinez was about to learn that lesson in the most expensive way possible. Back at the gate, the line of passengers behind the Thompson twins was growing restless. A tall man in a gray Armani suit checked his Patek Philippe watch and leaned forward with the impatience of someone accustomed to having his time valued by others. "Come on," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Let's move this along. Some of us actually have business meetings in Paris. We have tickets, just like you." Amara snapped back without turning around, "and we're being illegally detained based on our appearance." "Illegally detained," Rebecca scoffed. "You're being questioned because your documentation appears fraudulent. That's standard security protocol. Then scan our passes," Zara said, her voice still calm, but with an edge that anyone who knew her would recognize as a warning sign. "Verify them through your computer system. That's also standard protocol." Rebecca looked down at the phone still sitting on her counter, the boarding passes clearly visible on the screens. She had the ability to scan them instantly to verify the booking through Delta's computer system in less than 30 seconds. But doing so would end her moment of authority, would rob her of the chance to teach these girls a lesson about knowing their place. Instead, she waved toward the TSA checkpoint, security. Rebecca called out, her voice carrying across the gate area like a dinner bell. "I need assistance with 2 passengers refusing to comply with boarding procedures." 2 TSA officers who had been chatting near the oversized baggage area looked up, saw Rebecca's urgent gesturing, and began walking over with the resigned expressions of people who dealt with passenger disputes multiple times per day. The first was Officer Bradley, a heavy-set man in his 30s with a military bearing and the kind of confidence that came from carrying handcuffs and pepper spray. The second was Officer Martinez, no relation to Rebecca despite the shared surname, a younger man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "What's the situation here?" Rebecca Officer Bradley asked, resting his hand on his belt in a way that made the handcuffs clearly visible. "These 2 are refusing to leave the priority boarding lane," Rebecca said, pointing at the twins like they were evidence in a criminal trial. "They're presenting fraudulent boarding passes and becoming belligerent when I attempt to verify their documentation." "Belligerent," Zara gasped. "We haven't raised our voices. We haven't moved from this spot. We've simply asked you to do your job and verify our legitimate tickets." "She keeps raising her voice at me," Rebecca lied smoothly, her 15 years of gate agent experience paying off in her ability to craft a narrative that painted herself as the victim. "I felt threatened by their aggressive behavior." Officer Bradley turned to the twins, and Amara saw something she'd been seeing her entire life. The moment when a person in authority looked at her and made assumptions based on her appearance, her age, and her race. He didn't ask to see their boarding passes. He didn't ask for their side of the story. He saw 2 young black women, one pointing white woman, and made his decision. "Ladies," Officer Bradley said in the tone police officers use when they've already decided who's at fault, "you need to gather your belongings and come with us." "This is insane," Amara said, pulling out her phone. "I'm calling my father." "Yeah, you call Daddy," Rebecca sneered, finally picking up the next passenger's boarding pass and scanning it with theatrical efficiency. "Tell him to come pick you up at the curb. You're permanently banned from Delta Airlines for verbal assault on staff. You can't just ban us." Zara cried, tears of frustration beginning to well in her eyes. "We have hotel reservations in Paris. We have connections to make." "Not anymore," Rebecca said, typing furiously into her computer terminal. She was adding flags to their passenger profiles, do not board markers that would follow them to other airlines if they tried to book future flights. Level 3 security risk. She typed the same classification used for passengers who had physically threatened airline employees. It was a mark that could take months to remove even with lawyers. It was professional assassination disguised as security protocol. "Move along now," Officer Bradley said, stepping closer to Amara's personal space. "Put the phone away and grab your bags, or I'll be putting you in handcuffs for trespassing." But Amara wasn't moving. She looked at Officer Bradley, then at Rebecca Martinez, then at the growing crowd of passengers who were watching this public humiliation with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. She took a deep breath, feeling her heart rate slow as her father's voice echoed in her memory from countless family dinners and business conversations. When the other side gets emotional, you get analytical. When they scream, you calculate. When they try to intimidate you, you remember who you are and where you come from. "Fine," Amara said, her voice dropping to a register that was somehow both calm and terrifying. "We're moving." She grabbed Zara's arm and steered her sister away from the counter, but not before locking eyes with Rebecca Martinez one final time. "You have my name right?" Amara asked. "Amara Thompson. Make sure you spell it correctly." "That's Ms. Martinez to you," Rebecca replied, already turning her attention to the next passenger in line, dismissing the twins as completely as if they had never existed. Amara smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile that meant happiness. It was the kind of smile that her father wore during contract negotiations when the other side had just made a fatal mistake. "No," Amara said, her voice carrying clearly across the gate area. "It's not." She guided Zara toward the seating area, past the growing crowd of onlookers, past the businessman who had complained about delays, past the other passengers who were already pulling out their phones, because something about this interaction felt significant, felt like the kind of moment that would end up on social media within minutes. But none of them understood just how significant it was about to become. As they reached a quiet corner near the windows overlooking the tarmac, Amara pulled out her phone and scrolled to a contact simply labeled Dad. She didn't call the main number for Thompson Aviation Services. She didn't go through his assistant or his corporate office. She called his direct line, the number that only family used, the number that connected directly to the man who held fuel contracts for half the airports on the East Coast. Dad, Amara said when Marcus Thompson picked up on the first ring, we're at Miami International. "Gate B, 47. There's a problem. There's a bear." On the other end of the line, in his corner office overlooking Detroit Metro Airport, Marcus Thompson leaned back in his chair and listened as his daughter explained what had just happened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't ask questions. He just listened as Amara described Rebecca Martinez's behavior, Officer Bradley's assumptions, and the public humiliation that was still unfolding at Gate B-47. When she finished, Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked a single question. "What's the gate agent's full name?" "Rebecca Martinez." "Employee ID number." Amara squinted at the nameplate behind the counter, reading off the numbers. "And the officers, Bradley and Martinez. No relation, I think." Marcus Thompson was already typing, accessing employee databases that most people didn't know existed, pulling up personnel files and performance reviews, checking complaint histories and disciplinary actions. What he found didn't surprise him, but it did make him very, very angry. Rebecca Martinez, 3 previous complaints for passenger profiling, all dismissed by supervisors. Officer Bradley, 2 complaints for excessive use of authority. 1 settled out of court, a pattern of discrimination hiding behind procedure enabled by a system that protected employees over passengers. Sweetheart Marcus said, his voice still calm, but with an edge that both twins recognized, "I need you to put me on speakerphone. Dad, there are people listening. Put me on speaker, Amara." It's time these people learned something about respect. What Rebecca Martinez didn't know was that her public humiliation of the Thompson twins was being recorded from multiple angles. In the age of smartphones and social media, every public confrontation is potentially a viral moment. And this confrontation was about to become the kind of viral moment that ends careers and changes policies. Miguel Santos, a marketing executive from Orlando, had been standing directly behind the twins in the first-class boarding line. At 35, Miguel had traveled extensively for work and had witnessed his share of gate agent power trips, But something about Rebecca's tone and the twins' calm responses had triggered his sense that this was more than just a routine boarding dispute. He had quietly started recording on his phone, positioning it discreetly to capture both Rebecca's facial expressions and the twins' reactions. Miguel wasn't an activist or a social justice warrior. He was just a guy who recognized injustice when he saw it and had the tools to document it. Within minutes of starting his recording, he was quietly live streaming to his TikTok account, which had about 15,000 followers thanks to his travel content and aviation industry insights. "Guys," he whispered into his phone, "I'm witnessing what looks like racial profiling at Miami International right now. 2 young black women are being denied boarding for first class, and the gate agent is... Wow, this is getting bad." The viewer count on his live stream started climbing immediately. 15 viewers became 50, then 200, then 500. Comments began flooding in. "Call the news. This is discrimination. Which airline? This needs to be reported. Get their names. Document everything." But Miguel wasn't the only one recording. Emma Foster, a travel blogger from New York with about 50,000 Instagram followers, had been sitting near the gate working on her laptop while waiting for her own flight to London. She had looked up when Rebecca's voice rose, and her trained eye for compelling content immediately recognized that she was witnessing something significant. Emma hit the Go Live button on Instagram and propped her phone against her laptop screen, creating a wide-angle view of the entire gate area. Unlike Miguel's close-up perspective, Emma's stream captured the broader scene: the growing crowd of onlookers, the body language of other passengers, the way Rebecca was performing for her audience. "I'm Emma Foster, and I'm currently at Miami International Airport, where I'm watching what appears to be a clear case of racial profiling," she whispered to her phone. 2 young black women are being denied boarding, and the gate agent's behavior it's honestly shocking." Emma's live stream immediately attracted viewers who recognized her from her travel blog and YouTube channel. Within 10 minutes, she had 2,000 people watching live, and the comments were coming too fast to read. "This is disgusting. What airline? Emma, can you get closer? Someone call corporate." But the real social media explosion began when viewers started sharing the streams across platforms. Miguel's TikTok was screen recorded and reposted to Twitter with hashtags like Miami Airport Bias and Delta Discrimination. Emma's Instagram Live was clipped and shared to Facebook groups dedicated to travel rights and social justice. Within 30 minutes of the initial confrontation, 3 different hashtags were trending in Miami Thompson Twins, Rebecca Martinez, and Miami Airport Shame. The irony was that Rebecca Martinez, in her determination to make an example of 2 passengers she assumed were trying to scam their way into first class, was actually making an example of herself. Every word she spoke, every dismissive gesture, every moment of condescension was being broadcast live to thousands of viewers and recorded for permanent posterity. Back at the gate, Rebecca was completely unaware that her 15 minutes of fame had already begun. She was focused on what she saw as a successful resolution to a fraudulent booking attempt, and she was ready to escalate further to ensure that her authority wasn't questioned by anyone else in line. Janet Rebecca called to her supervisor, who had been handling boarding at an adjacent gate. "I need you over here. We have a situation." Janet Wilson, the assistant gate manager, was a 39-year-old woman who had worked her way up through the ranks at Delta over 12 years. She was generally well-liked by both passengers and staff, known for her ability to solve problems calmly and efficiently. But Janet also trusted her senior employees to make good judgments, and when Rebecca Martinez said there was a security issue, Janet's default assumption was to back her experienced gate agent. "What's happening?" Janet asked as she approached the counter. "2 passengers with fraudulent boarding passes." Rebecca explained, her voice still loud enough to ensure that Miguel's phone was capturing every word. "Executive companion status, but look at them." She gestured dismissively toward the twins. "Obviously a stolen corporate account. Janet looked at the twins, taking in their designer clothing, their expensive luggage, their calm demeanor. Something didn't feel right about Rebecca's assessment, but she had learned to trust her senior staff's judgment, especially when it came to potential fraud. "Did you attempt to verify the booking through the system?" Janet asked. "I was going to, but they became belligerent when I questioned the legitimacy of their passes." Rebecca lied smoothly. "They started making accusations about racial profiling and refused to provide additional documentation. Emma Foster's live stream caught this exchange perfectly, and her viewers exploded with outrage. She never scanned their passes. This is a lie. We all saw it. Document this. Evidence of false statements." Miguel zoomed in on Rebecca's face, capturing her expression as she lied to her supervisor. His TikTok followers were screen-grabbing still frames and creating memes in real time, turning Rebecca Martinez into an internet villain before she even realized she was being filmed. But the real escalation came when Amara put her father on speakerphone. "Put me on speaker, Amara." Marcus Thompson's voice carried clearly through the phone. "It's time these people learned something about respect." The twins exchanged a glance. They knew that tone. They had heard it in boardrooms when contractors tried to renegotiate terms mid-project, when competitors attempted to undercut their bids, when anyone made the mistake of assuming that Marcus Thompson's quiet demeanor meant he could be pushed around. "Dad, there are people listening," Amara said. "I know there are people listening," Marcus replied, his voice calm but carrying the kind of authority that made corporate executives sit up straighter in meetings. "I want them to listen. Put me on speaker." Amara touched the speaker button, and suddenly Marcus Thompson's voice was audible to everyone within 20 feet of their conversation. Miguel adjusted his phone angle to capture the audio. Emma leaned forward on her live stream. Other passengers stopped their own conversations to listen. "This is Marcus Thompson," the voice said, clear and professional. "To whom am I speaking?" Rebecca looked confused. She had been focused on Janet Wilson discussing the next steps for removing the disruptive passengers and hadn't realized that one of them was making a phone call. The idea that this phone call was relevant to her situation hadn't occurred to her. "I'm sorry," who Rebecca asked. "Marcus Thompson, CEO of Thompson Aviation Services. I believe you've been interacting with my daughters Amara and Zara Thompson. I'd like to understand why they're being denied boarding." The name meant nothing to Rebecca Martinez. She had worked for Delta for 15 years, but her knowledge of the aviation industry extended only to passenger service procedures and gate operations. She had no idea that Thompson Aviation Services existed, let alone that it was one of Delta's largest contractors. But Janet Wilson knew the name. Janet had attended regional management meetings where fuel costs were discussed, where vendor relationships were reviewed, where the critical importance of supplier partnerships was emphasized. The name Thompson Aviation Services appeared on reports she saw monthly. Marcus Thompson was not someone you wanted to have a problem with. Janet's face went pale. "Mr. Thompson," Janet said quickly, stepping closer to the phone. "This is Janet Wilson, Assistant Gate Manager. There seems to have been some kind of miscommunication." "Miscommunication?" Marcus's voice remained calm, but there was an edge to it that both twins recognized. "My daughters approached your gate with valid first-class boarding passes. They were accused of fraud, threatened with security, and publicly humiliated. What kind of miscommunication results in that treatment?" Rebecca finally understood that this phone call was connected to her situation, but she still didn't grasp the significance of who was on the other end of the line. To her, this was just another passenger trying to use connections to get out of trouble. So Rebecca interjected, "I don't care who you claim to be. Your daughters were presenting suspicious documentation, and when I attempted to verify it, they became aggressive and disruptive." The silence that followed was the kind of silence that comes before thunder. Miguel's viewers were watching the live count climb past 50,000. Emma's Instagram was being shared across Facebook groups and Twitter accounts. The hashtag Marcus Thompson was starting to trend. Suspicious documentation, Marcus repeated slowly. Ms. Martinez, and yes, I know your name now. You accused my daughters of fraud without making any attempt to verify their legitimate boarding passes. Would you like me to read you their confirmation numbers? How do you? Rebecca started to ask, then stopped. She was beginning to realize that this situation was spiraling beyond her control. I know their confirmation numbers because I booked the flights, Marcus said. I know their executive companion status is legitimate because Thompson Aviation Services holds that tier of partnership with Delta Airlines. And I know that your employee ID number is 47291, that you were hired in September 2007, and that you have 3 previous complaints for discriminatory behavior in your personnel file. Janet Wilson's face had gone from pale to gray. She was beginning to understand exactly how serious this situation had become. Mr. Thompson, Janet said quickly, if there's been an error? There's been no error, Marcus interrupted. There's been a deliberate pattern of discrimination. My daughters were profiled based on their appearance and their age. They were accused of crimes without evidence. They were threatened with arrest for the crime of existing while black in your first-class boarding line. Miguel's TikTok had been shared to Twitter, where it was being retweeted by verified accounts with millions of followers. A famous comedian had quote-tweeted it with, "This is why I fly private." A civil rights attorney had shared it with Exhibits A through Z of airline discrimination. A news anchor had reposted it with, "This story is developing." Emma's Instagram Live had been screen-recorded and uploaded to YouTube with the title, "Racist Gate Agent Attacks Passengers, Live." It was gaining views at a rate of thousands per minute. But none of the people at Gate B47 were aware of the social media explosion happening around them. They were focused on the increasingly tense conversation happening through Amara's phone speaker. Rebecca Janet whispered, "Maybe we should—" "I don't care if he's the president of the airline," Rebecca snapped, her frustration and embarrassment making her reckless. These girls tried to board with suspicious passes. They got an attitude when questioned, and I'm not going to be intimidated by some phone call. It was the wrong thing to say. It was possibly the worst thing she could have said. Because Marcus Thompson wasn't just some angry parent making empty threats. Marcus Thompson was the man who supplied fuel to 60% of East Coast airports. Marcus Thompson was the man whose company maintained ground equipment that kept planes moving on schedule. Marcus Thompson was the man who, with one phone call, could ground every Delta flight from Miami to Boston, and Rebecca Martinez was about to find out exactly how much power that represented. "Girls like you." Marcus repeated, his voice still calm but with a steel edge that made his daughters step closer to the phone. "Did I hear that correctly? Ms. Martinez, girls like you?" "I didn't mean." Rebecca started to backtrack, but it was too late. The words were already captured on multiple recordings, already being shared across social platforms, already becoming the kind of viral quote that ends careers. Miguel Marcus said, and both Miguel Santos and his TikTok viewers were shocked to hear themselves addressed directly. "Are you still recording?" Miguel looked around, confused about how this stranger knew his name before realizing that his TikTok username was visible on his live stream and someone had probably mentioned it in the comments. "Yes, sir," Miguel said, not sure why he was answering but unable to stop himself. "Good," Marcus said. "Everyone watching should see what happens next." Marcus Thompson had built his empire on relationships, contracts, and the kind of quiet power that most people never see but absolutely depends on. When he spoke, aviation executives listened. When he made commitments, they were honored without question. When he identified problems, they were solved immediately. But Marcus Thompson had never used that power for personal reasons. He had never leveraged his business relationships to solve family problems or to settle scores. He believed in keeping his professional and personal lives separate, in handling disputes through proper channels, and giving people the benefit of the doubt. Until now. Janet Wilson. Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly through the speakerphone to everyone at Gate B47. employee ID 62847. Hired September 2019, currently earning $52,000 annually, working for a company that pays Thompson Aviation Services approximately $4 million monthly for fuel and ground services. Is that correct? Janet's hands were shaking. She had pulled out her own phone and was frantically texting someone, probably her regional manager, possibly her district supervisor. The numbers Marcus had just quoted were not public information. They were not available to passengers or the general public. The only way someone could know those details was if they had access to Delta's internal systems or vendor contracts. Mr. Thompson. Janet said, her voice barely above a whisper. If there's been a misunderstanding. There's been no misunderstanding, Marcus replied. There's been discrimination. Miguel, Emma, everyone else who's recording this, I want you to understand what you're witnessing. My daughters were denied boarding, not because their documentation was invalid, not because they were disruptive, but because Rebecca Martinez looked at two young black women and decided they didn't belong in first class. Emma Foster's Instagram Live had reached 15,000 concurrent viewers, and the comments were scrolling too fast to read. Major news outlets were reaching out to her through direct messages asking for permission to use her footage. Her phone was buzzing with notifications from Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok as her content was being shared across every platform. Miguel's TikTok had hit 200,000 views and was climbing rapidly. The algorithm had identified it as trending content and was pushing it to millions of additional users. His follower count was jumping by thousands every few minutes. But the real shock was yet to come. Marcus Thompson pulled up another application on his phone, the operational control system for Thompson Aviation Services. With a few keystrokes, he could see every fuel delivery, every maintenance contract, every service agreement his company had with airports across the country. And with a few more keystrokes, he could suspend any of those services. Rebecca Martinez. Marcus said, his voice still maddeningly calm, "You work for an airline that depends on my company to function. Every gallon of fuel in every Delta aircraft at Miami International Airport came from Thompson Aviation Services. Every baggage conveyor, every ground power unit, every piece of equipment that keeps your operation running is maintained under contract with my company." Rebecca was beginning to understand that this wasn't just an angry parent with connections. This was someone who actually had power within the aviation industry. But she still didn't grasp the full scope of what that meant. "Sir," she said, trying to regain control of the situation, "I understand you're upset, but company policy requires me to verify suspicious documentation and—" "You never attempted to verify their documentation," Marcus interrupted. "You made an assumption based on their appearance and decided to humiliate them publicly. That's not company policy. That's discrimination. I have the discretion to—" "You have no discretion when it comes to denying service based on race," Marcus said, and for the first time real anger crept into his voice. "And you're about to learn that actions have consequences." Marcus opened the emergency contact application on his phone and placed a call to Delta's operational control center. He didn't go through customer service or the general corporate number. He called the direct line used by major vendors and contractors, the number that connected him to the people who actually ran the airline's day-to-day operations. Delta Operations. "This is Commander Patricia Wells," a voice answered immediately. "Commander Wells, this is Marcus Thompson, Thompson Aviation Services. I need to speak to whoever's in charge of vendor emergency protocols." There was a brief pause. Patricia Wells knew exactly who Marcus Thompson was, and a call from him to the emergency line meant something significant was happening. "Mr. Thompson, this is Dispatch Supervisor James Crawford. What's the nature of the emergency?" "James, I'm implementing an immediate fuel embargo for Miami International Airport. All Thompson Aviation Services deliveries and maintenance support are suspended effective immediately." The silence that followed was deafening. James Crawford was looking at his computer screen, seeing every Delta flight scheduled to depart from Miami International in the next 12 hours. 27 aircraft, over 4,000 passengers, millions of dollars in revenue. All dependent on fuel that Marcus Thompson was about to cut off. "Mr. Thompson," James said carefully, "can you help me understand the nature of this emergency? My daughters were racially profiled and denied boarding by your staff at Gate B47. Rebecca Martinez, employee ID 47291, accused them of fraud without attempting to verify their documentation, then lied to supervisors about their behavior. This isn't a fuel emergency, James. This is a corporate responsibility emergency." The phone call was still on speaker. Miguel was still recording. Emma was still live streaming. Hundreds of thousands of people were watching and listening as Marcus Thompson casually shut down one of the busiest airports in the country. The PA system at Miami International suddenly crackled to life. "Attention passengers at all Delta gates. We are experiencing temporary delays for all departures due to ground service interruptions. We apologize for any inconvenience and will provide updates as they become available." The effect was immediate. Passengers throughout the terminal pulled out their phones, checking flight status apps that were now showing delayed, indefinite for every Delta departure. Gate agents at other terminals were frantically calling supervisors trying to understand why their aircraft couldn't be fueled. Rebecca Martinez finally understood what was happening. The man on the other end of the phone call hadn't just made threats. He had actually shut down the airport. Every Delta flight at Miami International was grounded because she had refused to scan 2 boarding passes. "You can't do this," she whispered, but her voice carried clearly through Amara's phone speaker. "You can't shut down an airport because of a customer service dispute." "I'm not shutting down the airport," Marcus replied calmly. "I'm exercising my contractual right to suspend fuel deliveries when vendor personnel are subjected to discriminatory treatment by client employees. It's Section 12B of our service agreement with Delta Airlines if you'd like to look it up." Janet Wilson was on her own phone speaking frantically with someone from corporate. The conversation was one-sided from the observer's perspective, but her facial expressions told the story. Panic apologies, desperate attempts to explain a situation that was rapidly spiraling beyond any gate manager's ability to control. Officer Bradley, who had been standing nearby waiting for instructions to remove the disruptive passengers, was beginning to realize that the disruptive passengers might not be the problem. His radio was squawking with calls from other security positions, reports of angry passengers demanding explanations for flight delays, requests for additional personnel to manage growing crowds at departure gates. "Mr. Thompson," Janet said, ending her phone call and approaching Amara's phone with the kind of respect normally reserved for visiting corporate executives. "I've just spoken with our regional manager. We would very much like to resolve this situation." "I'm sure you would," Marcus replied. "Here's how we're going to resolve it. Rebecca Martinez will be removed from her position immediately. Officer Bradley will undergo sensitivity training before returning to duty. And my daughters will be treated with the respect that every passenger deserves, but which seems to require a special effort when the passengers happen to be young black women." Rebecca's face had gone from red to white. The reality of her situation was finally sinking in. She hadn't just had a bad interaction with difficult passengers. She had discriminated against the daughters of a man who could ground an entire airport with one phone call. "You can't fire me," she said desperately. "I have 15 years of seniority. I have union protection." "I'm not firing you," Marcus replied. "I'm simply suspending fuel service until Delta Airlines demonstrates its commitment to treating all passengers with equal dignity. If that results in consequences for employees who can't manage to treat people respectfully, that's a Delta Airlines Human Resources decision." The crowd at Gate B47 had grown significantly. Passengers from other gates had wandered over to see what was causing the delays. Airport staff were gathering to observe the situation that had shut down operations. Miguel's TikTok viewer count had passed 500,000 and was still climbing. Emma's Instagram Live was being simultaneously broadcast on Facebook and had attracted viewers from around the world. Mom, a voice called from the crowd, and Rebecca turned to see her 16-year-old son Carlos approaching the gate. He was supposed to meet her after her shift ended, but the commotion had drawn him to see what was happening. "Carlos, go wait in the car," Rebecca said quickly, but it was too late. Her son had already seen the crowd, the cameras, the airport security officers. He had heard enough of the conversation to understand that his mother was in serious trouble. "Mom, what's happening?" Carlos asked. "Why is everyone filming you?" It was Emma Foster who answered, speaking to her live stream but loud enough for everyone to hear. "Your mother just learned that discrimination has consequences, and everyone watching just learned that sometimes justice comes through power you didn't know existed." Marcus Thompson's voice came through the phone one more time, calm and measured and absolutely final. "Amara Zara, please step away from the gate area. Security will escort Ms. Martinez and Officer Bradley from their positions. Janet, you'll be hearing from our legal department regarding the service contract modifications that will be necessary to prevent future incidents of this nature." "Mr. Thompson," Janet pleaded, "surely we can. The fuel embargo will be lifted when I receive written confirmation that appropriate personnel actions have been taken and that new training protocols have been implemented. Until then, I suggest Delta makes arrangements with other suppliers, though I should mention that Thompson Aviation Services has exclusive contracts at 37 airports on the East Coast." The implication was clear. This wasn't just about Miami International Airport. Marcus Thompson had just put Delta Airlines on notice that discrimination against passengers would not be tolerated at any airport where his company provided services. Rebecca Martinez looked around at the crowd of people watching her professional destruction play out in real time. Her son was staring at her with confusion and growing embarrassment. Her supervisor was avoiding eye contact while frantically texting corporate executives. Airport security was approaching to escort her from the premises. And somewhere in the crowd, Miguel Santos was still recording, capturing every moment of what would become the most viral video of the year. The moment when a gate agent's bias met the quiet power of a father who refused to let his daughters be treated as less than equal. The lesson was just beginning. The emergency call to David Rodriguez, CEO of Delta Airlines, came at 6:47 p.m. Eastern Time while he was hosting a dinner party at his home in Atlanta. Rodriguez was celebrating the close of a successful quarter, entertaining board members and their spouses with wine that cost more per bottle than most people earned in a week. The last thing he expected was his chief operating officer calling with the kind of crisis that makes front-page news. "David, we have a significant operational emergency," Patricia Kim, the COO, said without preamble. "Marcus Thompson just shut down Miami International. All our flights are grounded." Rodriguez excused himself from the dinner table and walked into his home office, closing the door behind him. Marcus Thompson wasn't just another vendor complaint. Thompson Aviation Services was critical infrastructure for Delta's East Coast operations. If Marcus Thompson was angry enough to suspend fuel deliveries, something catastrophic had happened. "What's the situation?" Rodriguez asked, already reaching for his laptop. 2 passengers were denied boarding at gate B47. Racial profiling incident. The passengers were Thompson's daughters. Rodriguez sat down heavily in his chair. In 30 years in the aviation industry, he had dealt with mechanical failures, terrorist threats, natural disasters, and pandemic shutdowns. But he had never dealt with one of his critical suppliers cutting off service because of passenger discrimination. "How bad is the video?" he asked, because in 2024, there was always video. Viral on multiple platforms, over 1 million views in the first hour. The gate agent is on camera lying about the passenger's behavior, and Thompson himself is recorded shutting down operations in real time. Rodriguez pulled up Twitter on his laptop and immediately saw Delta discrimination trending nationally. The first video he clicked on showed Rebecca Martinez accusing two well-dressed young women of fraud while refusing to verify their legitimate boarding passes. The second video showed the aftermath, gate agents being escorted away by security while passengers demanded answers about their delayed flights. "Patricia, we need an emergency board meeting. Conference call in 30 minutes. And get me our legal team PR department and whoever handles vendor relations." "Already in progress," Patricia replied. "But David, there's more. Thompson isn't just threatening Miami. He's indicated that he could suspend service at 37 airports. That's 60% of our East Coast operations." Rodriguez closed his eyes and calculated the financial impact. If Thompson Aviation Services suspended fuel deliveries across their service area, Delta would be looking at approximately $48 million in losses per day. Hotels for stranded passengers, rebooking fees, regulatory fines, stock price impact, and lawsuit exposure would push the total cost well into 9 figures within a week. "What does Thompson want?" Rodriguez asked. "Personnel actions and training protocols. He's not interested in money. He wants change across the board." That was actually worse news. Rodriguez could negotiate financial settlements. He could authorize payments and sign checks. But Marcus Thompson was asking for something that would require admitting fault-changing policies and possibly facing regulatory scrutiny from federal agencies that monitored discrimination in transportation. Within minutes of Rodriguez ending his call with Patricia Kim, similar conversations were happening in corporate offices across the aviation industry. Word of Marcus Thompson's actions spread through airline executive circles like wildfire. If Thompson was willing to shut down operations over discrimination, every airline that used his services needed to review their own policies immediately. Meanwhile, the social media explosion was reaching unprecedented levels. Miguel Santos's original TikTok video had been viewed over 2 million times and was being shared across every platform. Emma Foster's Instagram Live had been clipped and reposted to YouTube, where it was gaining views at a rate of hundreds of thousands per hour. The hashtags were multiplying. Thompson twins, Rebecca Martinez, Marcus Thompson, Miami Airport, shutdown, Delta, discrimination, power, in quiet. Celebrity accounts with millions of followers were sharing the videos. News networks were preparing segments for their evening broadcasts, but the most impactful coverage was coming from unexpected sources. Airline pilots were sharing the videos with commentary about passenger treatment. Flight attendants were posting their own stories of witnessing discrimination. Airport workers were revealing behind-the-scenes examples of bias in passenger services. In 25 years of flying, I've seen this too many times. Respect Marcus Thompson for taking a stand. Rebecca Martinez isn't unique. This happens daily. Maybe now airlines will actually train their staff properly. Worked at MIA for 10 years. Rebecca had a reputation for profiling passengers. Everyone knew it. The financial markets were responding as well. Delta's stock price had dropped 3.2% in after-hours trading as investors processed the implications of a major supplier revolt. Thompson Aviation Services, while privately held, was being valued upward by industry analysts who recognized that Marcus Thompson had just demonstrated unprecedented leverage in vendor-client relationships. Investment blogs were calling it the Thompson effect, the moment when a critical supplier used economic leverage to enforce social change. Business schools were already reaching out to Marcus Thompson's office, requesting interviews for case studies on corporate power and social responsibility. But perhaps the most significant response was coming from other parents who had experienced similar discrimination. The comment sections of every video were filling with stories from families who had been profiled, questioned, and humiliated by airline employees who made assumptions based on appearance. This happened to my son at LaGuardia. Gate agent insisted his student ID was fake because he didn't look like an Ivy League student. My daughters were questioned for 20 minutes about how they afforded first-class tickets. They were 16, flying to visit their grandmother. I fly 200,000 miles a year. My teenage son gets hassled every time he travels alone. Thank you, Marcus Thompson, for taking a stand. The stories kept coming, hundreds of them, then thousands. Parents, students, professionals, and children sharing experiences of being judged, questioned, and humiliated by airline employees who saw skin color before seeing boarding passes. Back at Miami International Airport, the operational chaos was becoming a crisis management case study. 27 delayed Delta flights meant approximately 4,000 stranded passengers. Hotel vouchers were being distributed, but Miami hotels were already at capacity due to the holiday weekend. Passengers were sleeping on airport benches, forming long lines at customer service desks, and sharing their frustrations on social media in real time. The other airlines serving Miami International were scrambling to accommodate Delta passengers, but their aircraft were already booked. JetBlue, American, and United were adding flights, but the additional capacity wouldn't be available for hours. Airport restaurants were running out of food. Rental car agencies were experiencing unprecedented demand from passengers who decided to drive rather than wait for Delta to resolve their fuel crisis. The economic impact was rippling through South Florida's tourism industry. Meanwhile, Rebecca Martinez was having the worst day of her professional life. After being escorted from the gate area by airport security, she had been taken to a conference room where Delta's Human Resources Director, legal counsel, and union representative were waiting for her. The HR director, Sarah Williams, had Rebecca's complete personnel file spread across the conference table. 15 years of employment history performance reviews, and unfortunately 3 previous complaints for discriminatory behavior that had been noted but not acted upon. Sarah began, "We need to discuss the incident at Gate B47. Those girls were trying to scam upgrades," Rebecca said defensively. "I was protecting the company from fraud. You never attempted to verify their boarding passes," the legal counsel Michael Rodriguez pointed out. "The passengers' boarding passes were legitimate, issued through a valid corporate account confirmed by our reservation system." "How was I supposed to know that?" "By doing your job," Sarah replied bluntly. "By scanning their passes instead of making assumptions based on their appearance." The union representative, Tom Bradley, tried to defend Rebecca, but the evidence was overwhelming. Video footage showed her refusing to verify documentation. Audio recordings captured her making discriminatory statements. Most damaging of all, her lies to supervisors about the passengers' behavior were contradicted by multiple camera angles from bystanders. "The company is terminating your employment effective immediately," Sarah announced. "Discriminatory conduct is grounds for dismissal under both company policy and your union contract." Rebecca's world collapsed in that moment. 15 years of employment gone, her pension suspended pending the outcome of potential lawsuits. Her reputation in the aviation industry destroyed by videos that would follow her for the rest of her career. "My son," she whispered. "I have medical bills. I need this job." "You should have thought about that before you decided to treat passengers differently based on their race," Michael Rodriguez replied without sympathy. Delta Airlines has zero tolerance for discrimination. At the same time, Officer Bradley was having his own meeting with airport security supervisors. His failure to investigate the situation properly, his immediate assumption that the young black women were at fault, and his willingness to threaten arrest without evidence had made him a liability for Miami International Airport. "Your job is to de-escalate conflicts and gather information," his supervisor, Captain Martinez, informed him. "Instead, you escalated the situation by threatening to arrest passengers who had committed no crime and presented valid documentation." Bradley tried to defend his actions. "The gate agent said they were being disruptive, and you believed her without asking the passengers for their version of events. You threatened to handcuff 2 young women who had done nothing wrong. You intimidated them instead of protecting them." The suspension meant unpaid leave, while Bradley underwent mandatory sensitivity training. The training would take 6 weeks and cost him approximately $8,000 in lost wages. Even after completing the training, he would return to a probationary status with limited authority and constant supervision. But the social media attention was the worst part. Bradley's name had been mentioned in several viral videos, and airport security officers across the country were sharing their own opinions about his performance. The consensus was that Bradley had failed in every aspect of his responsibilities. Bradley's been a problem for years, always looking for reasons to hassle passengers instead of helping them. This is why we need better training. You can't assume the white person is telling the truth and the black person is lying. 27 years in airport security. Bradley's actions were textbook discrimination. He should lose his badge permanently. The criticism from his own profession was devastating. Airport security was a tight community where reputation mattered. Bradley's name was now associated with racial profiling and abuse of authority. Finding employment at any other airport would be nearly impossible. While the 3 employees who had enabled the discrimination were facing the consequences of their actions, the people who had documented the incident were experiencing very different outcomes. Miguel Santos, the passenger who had recorded the initial confrontation, was being hailed as a hero for his quick thinking and steady documentation. His TikTok video had been viewed over 5 million times, and his follower count had jumped from 15,000 to 500,000 overnight. News networks were requesting interviews. Publishing companies were inquiring about book deals. Speaking agencies were offering contracts for corporate presentations about bystander intervention and the power of documentation. I just saw something wrong and decided to record it. Miguel told CNN during a phone interview, "I've traveled enough to recognize discrimination when I see it. The important thing wasn't my video. It was Marcus Thompson's response. He showed that sometimes power can be used for justice instead of just profit." Emma Foster was experiencing a similar transformation. Her Instagram live stream of the incident had been viewed over 3 million times across all platforms. Her follower count had increased by 400,000, and brands were reaching out with sponsorship opportunities that would triple her annual income. More importantly, Emma was being contacted by civil rights organizations, journalism schools, and digital activism groups who wanted her to speak about the power of social media to document and combat discrimination. What we witnessed wasn't just one family getting justice, Emma told her YouTube audience in a follow-up video. We saw what happens when someone with actual power decides that dignity matters more than profit. Marcus Thompson didn't just protect his daughters. He sent a message that discrimination has real consequences. The broader impact was becoming clear through the stories flooding social media. Parents were sharing their own experiences of airline discrimination. Students were discussing bias in customer service. Travelers were posting examples of respectful treatment by airline employees who understood that appearance doesn't determine worthiness. Flew Delta yesterday. Gate agent saw me approaching with my teenage son and immediately smiled. "Good evening, Mr. Johnson. Boarding starts in 10 minutes. Different energy entirely. Asked about upgrades at check-in today. Agent said, 'Let me see what's available,' instead of looking at me like I was crazy." Progress. Overheard gate agent training other staff. Treat every passenger like they might be related to Marcus Thompson. Smart policy. But the most profound impact was on families who had previously accepted discrimination as an inevitable part of travel. Marcus Thompson's response had shown them that they didn't have to tolerate bias silently, that there were people with power who were willing to use it for justice. Dr. Angela Davis, a civil rights attorney and professor at Georgetown University, published an op-ed in the Washington Post titled "The Thompson Moment, When Economic Power Serves Social Justice." Marcus Thompson did something unprecedented in American business, Dr. Davis wrote. He used his economic leverage not to maximize profit, but to enforce dignity. He showed that discrimination isn't just morally wrong, it's economically unsustainable when those with power refuse to tolerate it. The academic analysis was already beginning. Business schools were developing case studies about vendor-client relationships and corporate social responsibility. Law schools were examining the legal frameworks that allowed Thompson to suspend services. Sociology departments were studying the social media dynamics that amplified the incident. But for Rebecca Martinez, sitting in her car in the Miami International Airport parking lot, the academic analysis was irrelevant. She was a 42-year-old single mother who had just lost her career because she had made assumptions about two young women based on their race. Her phone buzzed again with another text from Carlos' mom. "When are you coming home?" "People are posting stuff about you on Instagram." Rebecca started her car and drove away from the airport where she had worked for 15 years. She would never return as an employee. Her badge had been confiscated. Her access revoked, her career ended. The last thing she saw in her rearview mirror was the Delta terminal where Marcus Thompson had taught the aviation industry that discrimination has consequences. The lesson was far from over. Meanwhile, the most significant meeting was happening in Delta's Atlanta headquarters, where CEO David Rodriguez was facing his board of directors via emergency conference call. Board members who had been enjoying their Friday evening were now dealing with a crisis that threatened to cost the company hundreds of millions of dollars. "Ladies and gentlemen," Rodriguez began, "we are facing an unprecedented situation. One of our critical suppliers has suspended service due to discriminatory treatment of passengers by our staff. The financial impact could exceed $200 million if this situation isn't resolved quickly." "What are Thompson's demands?" asked board member Jennifer Walsh. Immediate termination of the employee involved mandatory bias training for all customer service staff and implementation of oversight protocols to prevent future incidents. "And if we don't comply, Thompson Aviation Services could suspend fuel deliveries at 37 airports. That would effectively shut down 60% of our East Coast operations." The silence on the conference call was deafening. Board members were calculating the implications not just for Delta, but for their own reputations and the company's stock price. "Vote," said Chairman Robert Kim. "All in favor of meeting Thompson's demands." The vote was unanimous. Marcus Thompson's quiet power had just changed corporate policy for one of America's largest airlines. And the ripple effects were only beginning. Rebecca Martinez sat in her Honda Civic in the employee parking lot of Miami International Airport, staring at the security badge that had been her identity for 15 years. The badge that had given her authority, respect, and a steady paycheck was now just a piece of plastic with her picture on it. Her hands were shaking as she scrolled through her phone, watching her professional destruction play out in real time across every social media platform. The first video she clicked on had been viewed 3.2 million times. It showed her accusing Amara and Zara Thompson of fraud while refusing to scan their legitimate boarding passes. The comments were brutal but accurate. "This is what racism in customer service looks like. She never even tried to verify their tickets. Hope she finds a new career because aviation is done with her." Rebecca had never thought of herself as racist. She had black friends, Hispanic colleagues, customers of all backgrounds whom she had served professionally for years. But watching herself on video, seeing her body language, hearing her tone of voice, she was confronted with the ugly truth about her unconscious biases. She had looked at two young black women in hoodies and seen trouble. She had assumed they were scamming upgrades without bothering to verify their documentation. She had lied to her supervisor about their behavior and called security to intimidate them. Every decision had been based on assumptions about who belonged in first class and who didn't. Her phone buzzed with a text from her son Carlos. "Mom, kids at school are sharing videos of you. They're calling you Airport Karen." What happened? Rebecca closed her eyes and felt tears streaming down her face. Carlos was a junior in high school at the age where social status mattered more than almost anything else. His mother, becoming an internet villain, would follow him for years. College applications, job interviews, dating. The video would be there waiting to surface whenever someone Googled his name. The financial implications were hitting her as well. 15 years of steady employment gone. Her pension suspended pending potential lawsuits from the Thompson family. Her health insurance terminated. Carlos's asthma treatments cost $800 monthly, even with insurance. Without her job, she couldn't afford his medication. She tried calling her ex-husband Miguel, hoping he might help with Carlos's expenses until she could find new employment. The call went straight to voicemail. She tried texting Miguel, "I need to talk about Carlos's medical bills." The response came immediately. Saw the videos. Deal with your own problems. The support she had expected from friends and family wasn't materializing. Her sister Carmen had sent a brief text. "Rebecca, what were you thinking?" Her best friend Lisa hadn't responded to any messages. Her neighbors were probably watching the same videos everyone else was watching, learning that Rebecca Martinez was the gate agent who had profiled the wrong passengers. The worst part was the gradual realization that she had brought this on herself. Marcus Thompson hadn't destroyed her career. She had destroyed it the moment she decided that two young black women didn't look like they belonged in first class. Thompson had simply made sure there were consequences for her actions. Meanwhile, Janet Wilson was experiencing her own professional nightmare. As the supervisor who had backed Rebecca's assessment without question, who had failed to de-escalate the situation, and who had been present when the discrimination occurred, Janet was facing disciplinary action that would end her career advancement at Delta permanently. Janet, her district manager Paul Rodriguez, explained during their meeting, "You had multiple opportunities to defuse this situation. You could have scanned the boarding passes immediately. You could have asked questions instead of accepting Rebecca's characterization. You could have treated the passengers with respect instead of viewing them as problems to be solved." Janet sat across from Paul in the conference room, still trying to process how quickly her career had derailed. At 39, she had worked her way up from baggage handler to assistant gate manager over 12 years with Delta. She had been on track for promotion to full gate manager within 6 months. Now she was being demoted to ground crew with no possibility of management responsibility for at least 3 years. "I trusted my experienced agent," Janet said weakly. Rebecca had 15 years of service. Rebecca had 15 years of service and 3 complaints for discriminatory behavior that were ignored by previous supervisors. Paul replied. "That's not experience, Janet. That's a pattern of bias that you failed to recognize and address." The demotion meant a 20% reduction in salary loss of management benefits and transfer to the overnight shift handling cargo operations. Janet would be working from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., dealing with freight instead of passengers invisible to the corporate executives who made promotion decisions. But the personal cost was even higher than the professional consequences. Janet's husband, Mark, was a teacher, and their combined salaries had barely been sufficient to handle their mortgage and their daughter's college expenses. The income reduction would force them to make difficult choices about Emma's education and their family's future. "How do I explain this to my daughter Janet?" asked Paul. "You explain that actions have consequences," Paul replied, "and that sometimes those consequences extend beyond the people who made the original mistakes." Officer Bradley was facing his own reckoning in the airport security office. His supervisor, Captain Martinez, had reviewed the security footage and found Officer Bradley's performance completely unacceptable. Instead of investigating the situation or asking questions, Bradley had immediately sided with the gate agent against the passengers. "Your job is to de-escalate conflicts and gather information," Captain Martinez explained. "Instead, you escalated the situation by threatening to arrest passengers who had committed no crime and presented valid documentation." Bradley tried to defend his actions. The gate agent said they were being disruptive, and you believed her without asking the passengers for their version of events. You threatened to handcuff 2 young women who had done nothing wrong. You intimidated them instead of protecting them. The suspension meant unpaid leave while Bradley underwent mandatory sensitivity training. The training would take 6 weeks and cost him approximately $8,000 in lost wages. Even after completing the training, he would return to a probationary status with limited authority and constant supervision. But the social media attention was the worst part. Bradley's name had been mentioned in several viral videos, and airport security officers across the country were sharing their own opinions about his performance. The consensus was that Bradley had failed in every aspect of his responsibilities. Bradley's been a problem for years, always looking for reasons to hassle passengers instead of helping them. This is why we need better training. You can't assume the white person is telling the truth and the black person is lying. 27 years in airport security. Bradley's actions were textbook discrimination. He should lose his badge permanently. The criticism from his own profession was devastating. Airport security was a tight community where reputation mattered. Bradley's name was now associated with racial profiling and abuse of authority. Finding employment at any other airport would be nearly impossible. While the 3 employees who had enabled the discrimination were facing the consequences of their actions, the people who had documented the incident were experiencing very different outcomes. Miguel Santos, the passenger who had recorded the initial confrontation, was being hailed as a hero for his quick thinking and steady documentation. His TikTok video had been viewed over 5 million times, and his follower count had jumped from 15,000 to 500,000 overnight. News networks were requesting interviews. Publishing companies were inquiring about book deals. Speaking agencies were offering contracts for corporate presentations about bystander intervention and the power of documentation. I just saw something wrong and decided to record it, Miguel told CNN during a phone interview. I've traveled enough to recognize discrimination when I see it. The important thing wasn't my video, it was Marcus Thompson's response. He showed that sometimes power can be used for justice instead of just profit. Emma Foster was experiencing a similar transformation. Her Instagram live stream of the incident had been viewed over 3 million times across all platforms. Her follower count had increased by 400,000, and brands were reaching out with sponsorship opportunities that would triple her annual income. More importantly, Emma was being contacted by civil rights organizations, journalism schools, and digital activism groups who wanted her to speak about the power of social media to document and combat discrimination. What we witnessed wasn't just one family getting justice, Emma told her YouTube audience in a follow-up video. We saw what happens when someone with actual power decides that dignity matters more than profit. Marcus Thompson didn't just protect his daughters. He sent a message that discrimination has real consequences. The broader impact was becoming clear through the stories flooding social media. Parents were sharing their own experiences of airline discrimination. Students were discussing bias in customer service. Travelers were posting examples of respectful treatment by airline employees who understood that appearance doesn't determine worthiness. Flew Delta yesterday. Gate agent saw me approaching with my teenage son and immediately smiled. Good evening, mister. Evening. Johnson. Boarding starts in 10 minutes. Different energy entirely. Asked about upgrades at check-in today. Agent said, let me see what's available instead of looking at me like I was crazy. Progress. Overheard gate agent training other staff. Treat every passenger like they might be related to Marcus Thompson. Smart policy. But the most profound impact was on families who had previously accepted discrimination as an inevitable part of travel. Marcus Thompson's response had shown them that they didn't have to tolerate bias silently, that there were people with power who were willing to use it for justice. Dr. Angela Davis, a civil rights attorney and professor at Georgetown University, published an op-ed in the Washington Post titled, "The Thompson Moment When Economic Power Serves Social Justice." Marcus Thompson did something unprecedented in American business. Dr. Davis wrote, he used his economic leverage not to maximize profit, but to enforce dignity. He showed that discrimination isn't just morally wrong. It's economically unsustainable when those with power refuse to tolerate it. The academic analysis was already beginning. Business schools were developing case studies about vendor-client relationships and corporate social responsibility. Law schools were examining the legal frameworks that allowed Thompson to suspend services. Sociology departments were studying the social media dynamics that amplified the incident. But for Rebecca Martinez sitting in her car in the Miami International Airport parking lot, the academic analysis was irrelevant. She was a 42-year-old single mother who had just lost her career because she had made assumptions about two young women based on their race. Her phone buzzed again with another text from Carlos' mom. "When are you coming home?" "People are posting stuff about you on Instagram." Rebecca started her car and drove away from the airport where she had worked for 15 years. She would never return as an employee. Her badge had been confiscated. Her access revoked, her career ended. The last thing she saw in her rearview mirror was the Delta terminal where Marcus Thompson had taught the aviation industry that discrimination has consequences. The lesson was far from over. 6 months after the Miami International Airport incident that changed everything. Marcus Thompson stood in the conference room of his Detroit headquarters, looking at a wall covered with implementation charts, training schedules, and progress reports. The Thompson Protocol, as it had become known throughout the aviation industry, was no longer just an angry father's response to his daughter's mistreatment. It had evolved into a comprehensive framework for eliminating bias in passenger services. "Show me the numbers," Marcus said to his team of engineers, data analysts, and civil rights consultants who had been working around the clock to build something unprecedented in American business: a real-time bias detection and intervention platform. Dr. Keisha Williams, the former NAACP legal counsel whom Marcus had recruited to lead the initiative, pulled up the latest analytics on the conference room's main screen. "We're now monitoring passenger interactions at 42 airports across 12 airlines. The AI platform has flagged over 800 potential bias incidents in the past 6 months, with intervention preventing escalation in 94% of cases. The Thompson Protocol used advanced audio processing to monitor conversations between airline employees and passengers, flagging language patterns that indicated potential discrimination. When the platform detected bias indicators, dismissive language requests for additional documentation from certain demographic groups, or differential treatment based on appearance, it immediately alerted supervisors and provided real-time coaching to employees." "The false positive rate?" Marcus asked. "Less than 3%, replied Dr. James Park, the former Google AI researcher who had designed the detection algorithms. "We're identifying actual bias, not just difficult conversations." But numbers, while impressive, didn't tell the human story of what the Thompson Protocol had accomplished. The real measure of success was in the experiences of passengers who no longer had to wonder if they were being treated differently because of how they looked. Amara Thompson, now in her final year at Columbia Law School, had spent the past 6 months working with her father's legal team to develop the policy frameworks that supported the technological solutions. Her senior thesis, Economic Leverage as Civil Rights Enforcement, had been accepted for publication in the Harvard Civil Rights Civil Liberties Law Review. Dad, Amara, said, joining the meeting from her apartment in New York via video conference, "I just got off a call with the Department of Transportation. They want to discuss making the Thompson Protocol a federal requirement for all airlines receiving government contracts." Marcus nodded, unsurprised. The success of the voluntary adoption program had attracted attention from federal agencies responsible for ensuring equal treatment in transportation. What had started as one father's response to discrimination was becoming a model for government policy. Zara, calling in from her design studio in Paris, where she was completing her studies at the École de la Chambre syndicale de la couture parisienne, added her perspective. "The European Union is asking about licensing the technology for their airports. They want to prevent the kind of discrimination that American airlines have been dealing with for decades." The international interest reflected a growing recognition that bias in customer service wasn't just an American problem. It was a global challenge that required innovative solutions. But perhaps the most meaningful measure of the Thompson Protocol's success was the story of David Rodriguez, the new gate manager at Miami International Airport's Gate B47, the same gate where Rebecca Martinez had made the mistake that changed an industry. David had been hired specifically because of his experience with diverse communities and his commitment to treating every passenger with equal respect. He was bilingual in English and Spanish, had grown up in a mixed-race family, and understood from personal experience how assumptions about appearance could affect someone's treatment. Every morning when I get to work, David told a CNN reporter during a feature story about the changes at Miami International, I see the sign that Marcus Thompson had installed at every gate where the protocol operates. It says, "Dignity is not negotiable." That's not just a slogan. It's a daily reminder that every person who approaches my counter deserves respect regardless of how they look, how they dress, or how old they are. The sign was part of a broader visual transformation at airports using the Thompson Protocol. Instead of the usual corporate messaging about efficiency and security, passengers saw reminders about dignity, respect, and equal treatment. The messaging was subtle but powerful, setting expectations for both staff and passengers about the kind of interactions that were expected. The training component of the Thompson Protocol had been particularly effective. Rather than traditional diversity seminars that focused on legal compliance, the training used virtual reality to let employees experience bias from the passenger's perspective. Gate agents, security officers, and customer service representatives wore VR headsets that put them in the position of passengers being questioned, dismissed, or treated with suspicion based on their appearance. When you experience being profiled even in a simulation, it changes how you interact with passengers, explained Dr. Sarah Martinez, the industrial psychologist who had designed the VR training modules. Employees who complete our training show measurable improvements in their treatment of all passengers, not just those who might historically have faced discrimination. The training was mandatory for all customer-facing employees at participating airlines with refresher sessions every 6 months. Employees who failed to meet the protocol standards faced progressive discipline up to and including termination. But the vast majority of staff embraced the training, recognizing that treating passengers with dignity made their own jobs easier and more satisfying. The financial impact of the Thompson Protocol had been significant, but not in the way skeptics had predicted. Rather than increasing costs, the reduction in discrimination incidents had actually saved airlines money by preventing lawsuit exposure, reducing customer service complaints, and improving passenger loyalty. Delta Airlines, the first major carrier to fully implement the protocol after the Miami incident, had seen customer satisfaction scores increase by 12% among minority passengers, with corresponding increases in repeat bookings and positive reviews. The Thompson Protocol isn't just good ethics, explained Delta CEO David Rodriguez during the company's quarterly earnings call. It's good business. When passengers trust that they'll be treated fairly, they choose to fly with us. When employees know they're supported in providing excellent service to everyone, they perform better. The protocol has actually improved our profitability while making travel more dignified for everyone. Other airlines had reached similar conclusions. United, American, JetBlue, and Southwest had all voluntarily adopted the Thompson Protocol within 6 months of its initial implementation. The competitive advantage of being known for fair treatment had convinced even reluctant executives that bias prevention was essential for business success. The protocol had also attracted attention from industries beyond aviation. Hotels, rental car companies, restaurants, and retail chains were requesting licenses to implement similar bias detection platforms. Marcus Thompson had inadvertently created a new sector of the economy focused on preventing discrimination through technology and training. But for all the corporate success and industry transformation, the most meaningful outcomes were personal. Families who had previously avoided air travel because of past discrimination were booking flights with confidence. Students were pursuing careers in aviation without worrying about facing bias from colleagues or passengers. Parents were no longer having to prepare their children for the possibility of being treated differently at airports. The ripple effects extended far beyond aviation. The success of the Thompson Protocol had inspired similar initiatives in other industries. Banks were implementing bias detection platforms for loan applications. Schools were using the training modules to prepare teachers for diverse classrooms. Hospitals were adopting the dignity principles for patient interactions. Marcus Thompson had achieved something unprecedented in American business. He had used economic power to create lasting social change. Meanwhile, Rebecca Martinez was learning to build a different kind of life. After 8 months of unemployment and rejection from every aviation-related job she applied for, Rebecca had finally found work at a small travel agency in Coral Gables. The job paid 30% less than her Delta position and offered limited benefits, but it was honest work that allowed her to support Carlos while he finished high school. The experience had forced Rebecca to confront her own biases in ways she had never expected. Mandatory community service as part of a legal settlement with the Thompson family had placed her at a refugee assistance center, helping new immigrants navigate American bureaucracy. Working with families who faced discrimination daily had opened her eyes to experiences she had never considered. "I never thought of myself as racist," Rebecca told her court-ordered therapist during one of her weekly sessions. "But watching those videos, seeing how I treated those young women, I realized I had assumptions I didn't even know I had." The therapy was part of a comprehensive program that Marcus Thompson had personally funded for all employees whose discriminatory behavior had been documented through the protocol. Rather than simply firing people and moving on, Thompson believed in the possibility of education and change. "Punishment without growth just creates resentment," Marcus explained to a gathering of civil rights leaders who were initially skeptical of his approach. "If we can help people recognize and change their biases, we prevent future incidents instead of just responding to them." Rebecca's participation in the program was voluntary. She could have simply served her community service hours and moved on. But something about the experience had motivated her to dig deeper into understanding how she had become someone who would profile passengers based on their appearance. "I grew up in a neighborhood where people who looked different were often seen as threats," Rebecca reflected. "I learned to be suspicious of young black men, to be wary of people who dressed differently than my family. Those lessons followed me to work, and I treated passengers the way I had been taught to treat strangers. The realization was painful, but necessary." Rebecca began volunteering at the refugee center beyond her required hours, helping families with airport navigation and travel documentation. She found purpose in ensuring that other immigrants didn't face the kind of treatment she had inflicted on the Thompson twins. Her son Carlos, initially embarrassed by his mother's viral infamy, had gradually come to understand the complexity of the situation. At 17, he was old enough to recognize that people could make mistakes, learn from them, and become better. His mother's journey from viral villain to community volunteer had taught him lessons about growth and redemption that no classroom could have provided. "My mom did something wrong," Carlos told his girlfriend when she asked about the videos that still occasionally surfaced on social media. "But she's trying to make it right. That's more than a lot of people do." The path to redemption was long and uncertain. Rebecca would never work in aviation again. Her name would always be associated with the Miami International incident. But she was building a different legacy, one interaction at a time, helping people navigate systems that had been designed to exclude them. Officer Bradley had followed a similar trajectory. After completing his sensitivity training and serving his suspension, he had chosen not to return to airport security. Instead, he had taken a position with a community policing program in Miami-Dade County, working with youth programs and de-escalation training. "I realized that I had been using authority to control situations instead of to help people," Bradley explained during a presentation to new security recruits. The Thompson incident taught me that respect isn't something you demand. It's something you earn by treating others with dignity. Bradley's transformation had been profound. The man who had threatened to handcuff 2 young women for the crime of existing, while Black was now training other officers to recognize and interrupt their own biases. His experience had become a cautionary tale and a blueprint for change within law enforcement communities. Janet Wilson had completed her 3-year probationary period and was gradually rebuilding her career at Delta. The overnight shifts handling cargo had given her time to reflect on her leadership failures and to develop new approaches to staff supervision. When she was finally eligible for management positions again, she brought with her a deep understanding of how quickly situations could escalate when biases went unchallenged. I learned to ask questions instead of making assumptions, Janet explained to the new gate agents she was training. When an employee tells you a passenger is being difficult, your first response should be to verify that assessment, not to automatically support your employee. The changes extended beyond individual transformation to institutional evolution. The Miami International Airport that Amara and Zara Thompson returned to for the 1-year anniversary of the incident was fundamentally different from the place where they had been humiliated and denied boarding. New signage throughout the terminal emphasized dignity and respect. Employee training materials prominently featured the lessons learned from the Thompson incident. Gate agents greeted passengers with genuine warmth instead of suspicious evaluation. Security officers focused on assistance rather than intimidation. Most importantly, the culture had shifted. The Thompson Protocol wasn't just a compliance requirement. It had become part of the identity of airports and airlines that implemented it. Employees took pride in providing excellent service to all passengers. Supervisors monitored interactions to ensure fairness. Passengers felt welcomed rather than judged. On a warm November evening, exactly 1 year after their original incident, Amara and Zara Thompson walked through the Miami International Airport once again. This time they were accompanied by their father, who had been invited to speak at a conference on technology and civil rights being held at a nearby hotel. As they approached Gate B47, they were greeted by David Rodriguez, the gate manager who had replaced Rebecca Martinez. "Ms. Thompson, Ms. Thompson." David said warmly, "Welcome back to Miami International. Your father's protocol has transformed how we serve passengers. It's an honor to have you flying with us again." The twins smiled, remembering the very different reception they had received at this same gate a year earlier. The transformation was visible in every interaction they observed. Gate agents treating all passengers with equal courtesy, security officers offering assistance instead of suspicion, staff members who had clearly been trained to see passengers as people rather than potential problems. But the most meaningful moment came when a young black teenager approached the gate with a first-class boarding pass, clearly nervous about whether he would be questioned or challenged. David looked at the boarding pass, smiled warmly, and said, "Welcome aboard, sir. First-class boarding begins in about 10 minutes. The lounge is just down the corridor if you'd like to wait there." The teenager's relief was visible. He had been prepared for confrontation, suspicion, or additional scrutiny. Instead, he had received exactly the same treatment that any other passenger would expect: courtesy, respect, and assistance. Amara and Zara watched the interaction and exchanged a glance that their father recognized. It was the look of young women who understood that their experience of discrimination had been transformed into something larger than personal justice. It had become a tool for protecting other families from experiencing what they had endured. "You know what the best part is?" Zara whispered to her sister as they boarded their flight to New York. What Amara replied: "That kid will never know how different this could have been. He'll never experience what we went through. That's real change." Marcus Thompson, listening to his daughter's conversation, smiled with quiet satisfaction. He had built his business empire on the principle that excellence in service should be universal, that every customer deserved respect regardless of their background or appearance. The Thompson Protocol had simply extended that principle across an entire industry. As their plane lifted off from Miami International Airport, Marcus looked down at the terminal lights below and reflected on the year that had changed everything. His daughters had faced discrimination, but their experience had resulted in protection for millions of other travelers. A gate agent's moment of bias had been transformed into an industry-wide commitment to dignity. The quiet power that had grounded flights and changed policies was now protecting families across the country. Children who looked like Amara and Zara would board planes with confidence. Parents who had once prepared their kids for discrimination could instead focus on the excitement of travel. Most importantly, the Thompson Protocol had proven that economic power, when guided by moral principles, could create lasting social change. Marcus Thompson hadn't just defended his daughters. He had built a platform that would defend countless other families for generations to come. In the end, the best revenge hadn't been getting even. It had been making sure that no one else would have to get even, because the problem had been solved at its source. The plane soared into the night sky, carrying 3 passengers who understood that true power isn't measured by the ability to destroy, but by the capacity to build something better for everyone who comes after you. Justice, as Marcus Thompson had proven, is most powerful when it protects not just those who were wronged, but those who might be wronged in the future. That protection, built on dignity and enforced through accountability, was perhaps the most meaningful legacy a father could leave for his daughters, and for the world they would inherit. 3 months later, Amara Thompson graduated magna cum laude from Columbia Law School and was offered positions at 3 top civil rights firms. She chose to join the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, where her first case involved airline discrimination. Zara completed her fashion design program and launched a clothing line celebrating diversity and confidence, with proceeds supporting the Thompson Foundation's scholarship program. The Thompson Protocol continues to expand globally, now operating in over 200 airports across 15 countries. Rebecca Martinez completed her community service and now works full-time at the Refugee Assistance Center, where she has helped over 500 families navigate immigration services. She never flew again, but she never forgot the lesson about treating people with dignity, regardless of assumptions. Marcus Thompson's quiet revolution had become a lasting transformation, proving that sometimes the most powerful response to injustice isn't anger or revenge, but the patient work of building platforms that prevent others from experiencing the same harm. In protecting his daughters, he had protected everyone's daughters. And that protection would outlast any viral video or trending hashtag, becoming simply the way things were supposed to work. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that dignity should never be negotiable, then I need you to do something right now. Hit that like button. Not just because it helps the algorithm, but because it tells YouTube that stories about justice and quiet strength matter to people like you. Subscribe to this channel and ring that notification bell, because we're not done telling stories about people who use their power to protect others instead of just protecting themselves. Share this video with someone who needs to see that discrimination has consequences, that bias can't hide behind policy, and that sometimes the most powerful response to injustice is building something better for everyone. Drop a comment and tell me. Have you ever witnessed someone stand up for what's right when everyone else stayed quiet? Have you ever been profiled, dismissed, or treated differently because of how you looked? Your stories matter, and they remind us all that we're not alone in fighting for dignity and respect. And remember, you don't need to be a billionaire CEO to make a difference. You can be like Miguel, documenting injustice when you see it. You can be like Emma, using your platform to amplify voices that need to be heard. You can be like the teenager at the end, who will never know how different things could have been because people before him refused to accept that discrimination was just the way things were. The Thompson Protocol isn't just about airlines. It's about all of us choosing to treat each other with the respect we all deserve. So share this story, because change happens when enough people decide that dignity isn't negotiable And justice isn't just for those with power. It's for everyone. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring, and thank you for believing that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they refuse to stay quiet in the face of injustice. I'll see you in the next video, where we'll continue sharing stories that prove kindness, courage, and character always win in the end.